Right now, this is a complete failure for Russia. Russians and collaborators are fleeing Kherson in a panic, abandoning their families and belongings. The Russians are panicking, abandoning and burning their equipment. This is a verdict for the Russian army in Ukraine. Putin is in despair. He has rolled out a new plan. Here's what will happen to Donbas. Sensational! They will destroy Moscow. Ukraine has created missiles of retribution. At this very moment, NATO is going on the offensive. Troops are already at the Russian border. Something incredible is unfolding just a step away from Russia. Wild screams in the Kremlin. What should we expect next? All this and more in our program Hotspot. Urgent! Chaos in Kherson region. Liberation has begun. Sensational. Collaborators are fleeing en masse to Crimea, leaving everything behind, from families to property. The Russians are destroying their own arsenal there. This is a verdict. Watch all the details right now.
Collaborators are fleeing from the left bank of the Dnipro in the Kherson region to Crimea. They are actively packing their things and moving their families. This is reported by the partisan movement Atesh.
Agents of Atish report that employees of the occupation administrations and deputies from Hola Pristan, Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka, and Hornostavka have started leaving for Crimea. There is active relocation of families.
The reason for the move is not specified by Atesh, but it's not hard to guess. The occupiers are afraid. And it's not just minor collaborators, but also high-ranking ones. For example, Volodymyr Saldo. A few days ago, information appeared online that the so-called governor of Kherson region called Moscow in a panic.
Saldo called and said that among local officials in the Kherson region, there are strange rumors going around. Supposedly, Vladimir Vladimirovich needs the DPR and LPR, and Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions will be given back to Ukraine. This issue is being actively discussed there. He was told that this is nonsense and that we'll take back Kherson someday and Zaporizhzhia too. The special military operation, thank God, isn't ending.
But it seems that even the collaborators have stopped believing the Kremlin. As a result, there is panic and fear. Fear that Ukraine will soon reclaim what is rightfully hers.
Knowing what the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, General Syrskyi, has stated, that wars are not won by defense alone, everyone understands perfectly well that sooner or later the moment will come when they will have to answer for what they've done. They will have to answer when the defense forces go on the offensive. The fact that some Russian officials, those with Ukrainian roots, let's say, are trying to move their families to the territory of the Russian Federation is a trend that, well, is not something that has only appeared in recent days.
The traitors and occupiers fear not only the upcoming offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces, but also death at the hands of Ukrainian underground fighters.
An important point is the partisan underground movement. We see how often the occupiers, so-called top occupiers, are eliminated by our partisans, our intelligence, and the security service of Ukraine. And for the occupier, it's only a matter of time before they are destroyed. They have started to understand this.
The Russian army is also ripening in the Kherson region. The occupiers have even started burning their own equipment just to avoid going to the front lines. Atesh showed one such arson incident. Equipment from the 24th Motorized Rifle Regiment is burning. The partisans state that the situation in the regiment is critical. Among Russian soldiers, there are more and more Sokhniks, those who desert their units and run away. The reason is the same as always for the Russian army, command. The soldiers complain about harsh and incompetent orders from the command, which have led to heavy losses for the unit, and the troops were left at their positions without electronic warfare equipment, alone against Ukrainian drones.
Most often, as they say, they put on their skis with weapons firmly in hand, deserting their posts, and then head directly to Sochi, a significant and well-known destination. In Russian, this is called unauthorized abandonment of one's unit. They do this to run away, to escape, and try to survive. Some find a way to surrender and become prisoners of war. That's how it is. But as a rule, such cases of leaving, of desertion, are quite frequent.
At this point, it's not possible to say that Sochi is a mass phenomenon, but these are not isolated cases either. Russian soldiers are increasingly refusing to dance to the tune of their commanders, for whom they are nothing more than cannon fodder. Even the local traitors and collaborators understand the inevitability of the Ukrainian armed forces' arrival. But will they manage to escape in time?
Shock. Hell in Russia! The Ukrainian armed forces have delivered a decisive blow. Incredible! The White House has signed everything. New killer missiles. They will reach Tula and Kaluga. The Kremlin is shaken. The Gore strikes at the Kaliber missiles. Bloody revenge for the Russian army. Meanwhile, Russia has thrown all its forces into Donbas. But the Ukrainian armed forces are holding their ground to the death. What is really happening at the front? Watch the report.
The U.S. State Department has approved the sale of more than 3,000 IRAM cruise missiles to Ukraine. They can be launched from F-16, MiG-29, and Su-27 aircraft. Their range is 450 to 460 kilometers.
Right now, I have a normal relationship with Zelensky, but it's completely different from before because we no longer give money to Ukraine. We're making money. Here's what's happening. NATO is buying all the necessary weapons and paying for them. But even so, I want to stop the war.
If the Russian Federation tries to torpedo the efforts of the United States at the moment of ending the war in Ukraine, then accordingly the Ukrainian side will receive approval from both the President of the United States and consequently the Pentagon to use these strike weapons against the territory of the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian intelligence operatives used an FPV drone for the first time to strike a ship carrying Kaliber missiles.
We're talking about a strike on a carrier of Kaliber cruise missiles. This is the Project 21631 by NM. So what's special about it? The crucial point was that GUR drones effectively hit rapidly moving targets with precision. In other words, this is an unprecedented case. Once again, the strike hit the ship's radar. This significantly reduces the overall capabilities of this particular cruise missile carrier at the present moment, both in terms of effectively countering various types of drones and accordingly the crucial ability to launch the cruise missiles themselves, which is a primary function of such a vessel.
Russian ship Orel was attacked by drones. The video shows explosions and a fire. According to local authorities, an apartment building and several cars were damaged.
What is this?
There have been repeated cases when Russian air defense, particularly the Pantsir S-1 missile system, instead of shooting down Ukrainian drones, ended up hitting residential buildings in Belgorod, Moscow, and the Moscow region. So this is already, a sad statistic of the actions of Russian air defense when it comes to striking their own residential infrastructure.
The fall of drone debris caused a forest fire just 10 kilometers from Putin's palace in Gelendzhik. Because of the fear of drone attacks, Putin has almost completely stopped flying to his residence in Sochi.
You don't live my life, and you don't understand what security issues are like. It's just that when a person is far removed from this, they simply don't notice it.
The Russian air defense system is so-called localized in nature. That is, the main resources are directed either to cover Moscow, the Moscow region, or accordingly, Putin's residences, both in Valdai and likewise in Gelendzhik. When several dozen UAVs are launched, some of them are indeed neutralized by Russian air defense, but more than 40%, and according to experts, even more than 60%, reach their targets.
Ukrainian defenders destroyed an MT-LB armored tractor in the Pokrovsk direction. The number of these vehicles among the Russians is rapidly decreasing, since they were produced exclusively at the Kharkiv tractor plant. The infrastructure of the key railway station in Tver was also destroyed.
This concerns blocking the supply of petroleum products, personnel, and heavy armored vehicles that will be used directly on the front line, both on Russian territory, specifically in the Kursk region, and on Ukrainian territory. It should be noted that this is not the first strike on Tver.
Russian diplomacy is targeting the fortified belt from Konstantinovka to Kramatorsk, the last important line of defense in Donbas. But the Ukrainian armed forces do not believe that, as a result of the negotiations, they will be ordered to retreat.
The Russian Federation fully understands that storming these four cities of the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration is practically impossible, neither in the near nor in the distant historical perspective. According to assessments by both British intelligence and the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, it would take the Russian Federation at least 4 to 5 years to achieve this. That is why the occupiers are trying to push the theory of either so-called territorial exchanges or proposals like these for the creation of a so-called buffer or neutral zone.
It is obvious that the Russians are unable to achieve the results they want by military means, and no one will agree to give up territories at the negotiating table. But it seems that Putin is not particularly concerned about this, and he is still willing to keep fighting at the cost of destroying Russia itself.
Unexpected. Putin is preparing to surrender. The Kremlin's new terms, the fate of Donbas is decided. Turkey has made a shocking statement. Putin's plan has been leaked. Europe has issued an ultimatum. This is how the war could end. You will be surprised when you hear it. Details in the report.
40 kilometers of Ukrainian territory as a buffer zone. European leaders are discussing one of the options for ensuring post-war settlement in Ukraine, namely the creation of a 40-kilometer buffer zone between Ukrainian and Russian forces. However, there are still many disagreements here as well.
A buffer zone, stabilization forces, a peacekeeping contingent, these are all essential things for the period after, not before, any significant conflict or resolution. Yes, it can be discussed now. But for this concept to work, what is needed is nothing less than the willingness of the Russian Federation to enter into peace negotiations. And so far, yes, and for the war to actually end.
On August 28th, Zelensky also held an online meeting with the leaders of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Denmark. The main topic was the discussion of security guarantees for Ukraine.
When we talk about security guarantees, we need clear answers. Who will help us defend ourselves on land, in the air, and at sea if Russia attacks again, and how exactly can you participate? I ask you to define your role.
Nevertheless, Zelensky even noted that he had reached an agreement with Trump for America to be part of the security guarantees. Although earlier we heard different rhetoric from the US president,
I would venture to suggest that this significant development is indeed the direct result of the recent and crucial Washington meeting, encompassing both the bilateral discussions in the Trump-Zelensky format and the broader, more extensive engagements in the Zelensky with Europe plus Trump format. Because it was precisely there, in my opinion, that the fundamental idea was conceived to provide Ukraine with comprehensive security guarantees that would be very analogous to Article 5.
Zelensky also called the shelling of Ukraine on the night of August 28th a blow not only to Ukraine but also to Trump himself, and urged Europe and the US to give a clear response to such actions by Russia.
Right now, Russia is currently aggressively striking at the entire global community.
Russia is now striking at everyone in the world who strives for peace. This is a blow to Ukraine, this is a blow to Europe. It is also a blow by Russia against President Trump and other global actors. In Washington, we heard that Putin supposedly is ready to end the war, to meet at the leaders' level and to resolve key issues. But he chooses ballistics over any real steps toward peace.
Meanwhile, as everyone awaits a personal meeting between Putin and Zelensky, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz believes that this meeting will not take place, even despite all agreements.
If we look at the current situation today, I genuinely do not see any compelling reasons that would significantly push President Putin toward any meaningful negotiations, especially personal and direct ones. An example of when he is interested and how he reacts could be the meeting in Alaska. He was jumping out of his skin, so eager to fly out, meet, and make a deal with Trump. And it was organized instantly.
Russia has changed its rhetoric. The Turkish Foreign Ministry reports that Russia no longer insists on controlling the entire territory of the 4 Ukrainian regions. However, now the discussion is about holding the front line in Zaporizhia and securing for Russia 25 to 30% of the territory of Donetsk region.
I think this is just white noise because I understand Putin's logic very well, and I don't believe that he could abandon any of his ideas that quickly, And here there is no, if he had said it himself, even then I wouldn't have believed it. But in this case, these are just leaks and attempts to probe the situation. How will people react to this and to that? And then they sit back, watch, and build their strategy accordingly.
Meanwhile, The Atlantic even reports that Trump is ready to agree to a peace deal on almost any terms, since Russia's rhetoric remains unchanged and the lack of progress in resolving the conflict only irritates him.
And now Trump's term has already gone well past 6 months. In other words, the political honeymoon is over. Now there are questions for him. Sociological data shows that, in fact, there are a lot of questions, right? And during this entire period of time, Vladimir Putin hasn't suffered at all because of Donald Trump. On the absolute contrary, at a certain crucial point, he remarkably returned like a graceful butterfly to the prominent political big leagues, clearly showing the entire world that he can skillfully outmaneuver Donald Trump, even on his very own turf.
200 billion euros for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The European Commission is developing a mechanism by which nearly 200 billion euros of frozen Russian assets could be used for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war ends.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Breaking news. NATO is preparing for an attack. Troops are already right at the border. The Kremlin is trembling. NATO is holding its final rehearsal in Finland, just a step away from Russia. European and American soldiers are honing their skills ahead of the decisive battle. What specific combat scenarios are being practiced? And why are the exercises taking place so close to Russia's borders? Watch right now.
The international military exercise Southern Griffin 25 has begun in Finland. 1,600 servicemen from Europe and the US are taking part in the maneuvers. Since the beginning of August, Finland's Ministry of Defense has stated that US troops have been actively participating in exercises on Finnish territory and in the Baltic Sea since the second half of 2025, thereby increasing their military presence there. Little-known Russian sources are reporting on the alliance forces' exercises right at Russia's border. Top Russian propagandists as well as the official Kremlin remain silent.
In recent years, Moscow has recorded unprecedented NATO activity near Russia's western borders. The alliance expanding its operations justifies this by the need to deter aggression. The Russian side has repeatedly expressed concern over the buildup of the bloc's military presence in Europe. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has emphasized its readiness for dialogue with NATO on an equal footing, provided that the West abandons the militarization of the continent.
The Southern Griffin 25 exercises involve NH-90 transport helicopters and MD-500 light helicopters belonging to the UT regiment, as well as F-16 Hornet fighter jets in service with the Finnish armed forces. In addition, aircraft from the armed forces of various European countries and the United States will also participate in the maneuvers. After Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Finland, in order to ensure its own security, effectively joined NATO almost immediately. Now, exercises are held here on a regular basis.
The Russian Federation periodically raises the issue of a possible armed confrontation scenario with the NATO bloc and the new countries that have joined it. Specifically, this refers to Sweden and Finland. Let's at least recall those events when the so-called map of possible territorial claims by the Russian Federation against a number of Baltic countries appeared. Moreover, it was about possible Russian control over the Swedish island of Gotland.
These exercises are part of the implementation of the Agreement on Defense Cooperation between Helsinki and Washington, under which the American side will gain access to 15 Finnish military facilities. In a recent interview, Finnish President Alexander Stubb stated that the militarization and preparation of Finland for a possible invasion will continue as long as the war in Ukraine persists.
As I have always emphasized, we can't do anything about our geography. We have a history with Russia, and we will have a future with Russia. But today, of course, relations are very complicated. In fact, there are no relations because of the war. But someday, when the war is over, new relations will certainly be built. Finland will restore relations with Russia only after the war with Ukraine ends. Putin has united Europe, expanded NATO by bringing in Finland and Sweden, and has effectively increased NATO's defense spending from 2 to 5%.
The Russian Federation has repeatedly voiced its territorial claims and its intention to protect Russian-speaking populations in the Baltic countries and beyond. That is why Finland and other countries bordering the Kremlin are acting proactively. For now, Russia's main military resources are concentrated on the war in Ukraine.
Various dates are being mentioned, of course 2026 and later dates. So accordingly, NATO countries, specifically the closest neighbors, countries bordering the Russian Federation or nearby neighbors, are trying to replenish their arsenals with the types of weapons that will allow them to actively counter possible Russian aggression.
Recently, the US deployed 3 B-1B bombers to Norway for NATO exercises to practice coordination with allies, test combat readiness, and carry out a number of joint missions. The Southern Griffin 25 exercises on the border with Russia will continue until September 12th.
Urgent. Zelensky has delivered a verdict on Putin. The Kremlin has blown up the negotiations. The latest massive shelling of Kiev has changed everything. The Kremlin's secret plan has been revealed. Here's why they did it. How did the pro-Ukrainian coalition react to this, and what is now the fate of the negotiations? Watch now for all the details.
At least 19 people have been killed, 4 of them children. More than 40 people have been injured. The Russian army launched 600 drones and missiles of various types at Ukrainian territory. The largest strike targeted Kiev. From the Kremlin, where they pretend in front of Trump to want to stop the war, came the message that Russian military forces had delivered a successful strike on military infrastructure. The youngest NATO militant, whom Russians keep imagining, is 2 years old. Among the damaged infrastructure are a train, a cafe, homes, and the European Union's representation in Kiev. Kaja Kallas summoned the Russian chargé d'affaires to the EU for a reprimand. Ursula von der Leyen also condemned the Russians.
This was also an attack on our delegation. I just spoke with our deputy ambassador, and I am relieved to report that none of our staff were harmed. Last night's attack took place in the immediate vicinity of the diplomatic mission. The presence of our union's representation is yet another grim reminder of what is at stake.
This shows that the Kremlin will stop at nothing to terrorize Ukraine, blindly killing civilians, men, women, and children, and even targeting the European Union.
The British Council in Kiev was less fortunate. The institution reported that after the Russian army's attack, one employee was hospitalized with injuries. The strike was condemned on social media by British Prime Minister Starmer. The president of the European Commission assured partners and Ukrainians that Europeans will soon discuss how to direct frozen Russian assets to military support for the defense forces, and that Russians will pay for their aggression and face a 19th package of sanctions. However, it is unclear when this will happen. Ukrainians remember how long and painfully the partners struggled over the 18th package. By the way, the Hungarians who blocked the decision-making after the strike did not even offer their condolences. On that day, they imposed a ban on entering the Schengen zone for the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdi, a Ukrainian of Hungarian descent known as Magyar. A response from him and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not long in coming.
If a Russian pipeline is more important than Ukrainian children killed by Russia this morning, that is moral decay. Hungary has ended up on the wrong side of history. We will respond in kind.
President Zelensky also condemned the reaction of Orban's team. For the first time in his address, he also appealed to China.
Russia chooses ballistics over the negotiating table, chooses to continue killing rather than end the war. And this means that Russia is still not afraid of the consequences. Russia still takes advantage of the fact that at least part of the world turns a blind eye to murdered children and looks for excuses for Putin. We are waiting for China's reaction and to see what will happen. China has repeatedly called for the war not to be expanded and for a ceasefire. This is not happening because of Russia.
As for Hungary, the call to respond and condemn is most likely not directed at Orban because he doesn't understand any signals except those coming from Moscow and Washington. In my opinion, this is actually an appeal to Washington so that Trump, as some media and insiders report after a certain phone conversation with Orban regarding changing his position on Ukraine's accession to the EU, could hear the Ukrainian president's call and perhaps reach out to Orban once again. Because we haven't seen any drastic changes and we would like to see decisive action. And as for China, this is an attempt to bring into the public sphere the fact that China, while not very openly, is nevertheless a supporter of Moscow, and we understand this. And with each passing year, China's support for Russia only increases. And it's worth recalling the statement that Russia cannot lose this war.
The large-scale strike on Ukraine was carried out by the Russians on the eve of the Ukrainian delegation's meeting with Special Envoy Witkoff in New York, who, since Trump entered the Oval Office, has been a frequent guest at the Kremlin. Analysts believe that it is not worth expecting any reaction from the American side to this Russian démarche. Neither intimidation with tariffs and sanctions, nor the signing of a deal over natural resources as a guarantee of protection stopped the Russians from destroying American business in Ukraine and terrorizing Ukrainians.
Shock! Ukraine has unveiled a weapon of retribution. It will destroy Moscow. This nightmare will be a sentence for the Kremlin. Ukrainian manufacturers have presented a new missile with a range of 1,000 kilometers. This is a complete game changer. Could it be that the Ukrainian armed forces no longer need American missiles? And how will this weapon change the course of the war? Watch all the details right now.
For the first time, Ukraine showcased its long-range Neptune on Independence Day. The official portal of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Zbroi, has for the first time revealed the new Ukrainian missile, the long-range Neptune with a range of up to 1,000 kilometers. We are Ukrainians, we have independence, and we have weapons. The missile is based on the R-360 Neptune anti-ship cruise missile, which was used to sink the flagship of the occupiers' Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, at the time. Moskva is the first. 2 holes, painoish. She'll list to the side. She'll list to the side. Compared to its anti-ship counterpart, the long-range Neptune has been increased in size and range and is also capable of striking land targets.
The missile that was clearly shown in the footage is significantly longer and possesses a larger diameter. Well, since, let's say, the naval Neptune has a range of 280 kilometers, and here it's 1,000 kilometers, they had to seriously redesign the fuselage. It should be noted that our engineers took the simplest approach. That is, they simply increased the geometric dimensions of the missile, thereby increasing the fuel capacity.
At the same time, a fake story authored by the Kremlin's troll factory leaked into the media. Supposedly, the Trump administration is suspending deliveries of Patriot, HIMARS, and Hellfire missiles to Ukraine. The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation stated that there is no suspension of aid. And most importantly, as of today, Ukraine is much less dependent on American missiles. Why is Trump's blockade of ATACMS no longer so frightening for Ukraine? Washington may have overestimated the impact of American long-range missiles, while Kiev is strengthening its own defenses. Ukraine's independence in carrying out long-range strikes on Russian territory is a result of a significant increase in Ukrainian production.
Ukraine has successfully developed and is now mass-producing at least two distinct types of very long-range, indeed ultra-long-range unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones. These specific models are identified as the Lyuti and the FP1. Yes, the FP1. The FP1 has a range of 1,600 kilometers, while the Lyuti drone originally had a range of about 1,000 kilometers when its landing gear was fixed. Now, with retractable landing gear and an increased fuel supply, it has a range of 1,200 kilometers.
The scale of production allows for the daily launch of about 100 long-range drones targeting military and energy sites within the Russian Federation. Just in the past few days, Ukrainian drones have successfully struck the Syzran oil refinery in the Samara region.
Do you see it? I don't see it. Looks like that's it.
This is the final one.
That's all.
That's all for now. It hit the target, right? Yes, it certainly did.
As well as the Ust-Luga seaport in the Leningrad region.
Film it, film the group. You can see how it's flying.
And of course, we can't forget about the Ukrainian Pink Bird, the Flamingo cruise missile, whose appearance has significantly shifted the balance of power in the Russian skies.
And if we use the Flamingo, it can even reach Omsk. There you go. That means all Russian missile factories and 90% of Russian oil refineries, more than 95 Russian oil refineries, 90% of enterprises in the Russian military-industrial complex will be within striking range.
The main advantage of the Ukrainian Bird is its simple production, a strike range of up to 3,000 kilometers and an impressive warhead, 1,150 kilograms.
When a missile, like the Flamingo, if a drone hits, it causes damage. If a missile like that hits with explosives with a warhead of 1,150 kilograms as stated, then we're not talking about damage. We're talking about complete destruction. If it's an oil refinery, for example, there won't be any repairs or searching for spare parts, just scrap metal collection. And if it's an industrial facility, some kind of workshop, right? So you just clear the site and build a new workshop because repairing it is out of the question. There will be a crater 20 to 25 meters wide.
The fate of Russian oil refineries, military factories, airfields, and other defense industry facilities now depends little on Washington's opinion or position.
That's all for now. For more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.